Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Midtown Scholar Bookstore's virtual event series. My name is Alex Brubaker. I'm the manager here at the Scholar, and as always, I am live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at the bookstore. Whether you're joining us on Crowdcast or Facebook Live or even YouTube Live, thanks so much for tuning in. Welcome to our live stream series where we host authors and speakers, and we keep the conversation going about books we love. Our featured book this afternoon is Code Name Madeleine by Arthur MAGIDA. If you haven't yet purchased the book, I'd like to encourage you to do so. Purchasing Arthur's book through us helps support the author, our staff, and it helps the bookstore continue to run during this strange, strange time that we're living in. If you click the green button below, it's right below my face, right at the bottom of the screen, that will direct you to our website to purchase a first edition copy of Arthur's book. And I'll tell you what, Arthur has really hooked us up today. Not only will you receive a signed book plate along with your order, but you're in for a treat. We have these special 3D glasses. Here they are, with a secret coded message on them. So if you order through us, you get the book plate, of course the book, and the secret spy glasses. We have a limited supply, so if you order through us, you'll get them all shipped out to you. If you're watching this through Facebook Live or YouTube Live, just look in the comments section and you should see we've provided a link there as well, or simply head to midtownscholar.com. Now I have to plug just one bit of information here. The bookstore is still closed to the public as of now, but we are offering a Saturday sidewalk sale every Saturday in June from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. We bring out new releases, signed copies, bestsellers, discount books. Of course, we'll have Arthur's book, and yours truly will be there all day. So if you want to swing by and say hi, maybe grab a book or two, we would love to see you. But now on to our program this evening. We are honored to welcome Arthur MAGIDA and RAFIA ZAKARIA to virtual Harrisburg. RAFIA is the author of the Upstairs Wife, An Intimate History of Pakistan, and Veil. She is a columnist for Dawn in Pakistan. She writes regularly for The Guardian, Boston Review, The New Republic, and the New York Times Book Review. And I have to plug RAFIA's upcoming book. It won't be released until 2021, but is one to mark your calendars and look forward to. It is called Against White Feminism, and it's coming out from our beloved friends at W.W. Norton in 2021. Keep an eye out for it, and hopefully, whether in-store or online, we'll see RAFIA again to talk about her book. Now, our featured author this evening is Arthur MAGIDA. Arthur is an award-winning journalist and the author of The Nazi Seance and The Rabbi and the Hitman. He lives in Baltimore, Maryland. Of course, his new book that we are here for this evening, again, is titled Codename Madeleine, A Sufi Spy in Nazi-Occupied Paris. I'll read you just one of my favorite blurbs about the book from Alex Crenshaw. He writes, Codename Madeleine is one of the finest and most affecting true stories of espionage I have ever read, an engrossing tale of an amazing woman and her immense courage in the face of evil, end quote. Now, before I hand it off to Arthur and RAFIA, I'd like to encourage you to ask questions. Click the Ask a Question button below. Again, it's below the green button below my face. If you have a question for either Arthur or RAFIA, I can't promise we'll get to all of them, but we'll save some time after the interview to go over your questions. But at this time, please join me in welcoming onto the screen Arthur MAGIDA and RAFIA ZAKARIA.
Hello, everybody. This is RAFIA and Arthur. I'm wearing my spy look because we are in for a treat and a story about a most fascinating spy today, Noor Inayat Khan. I actually received this book several months ago, and was just absolutely riveted from the first page. I had heard about Noor Inayat Khan, but I didn't know her story, especially not as written as part of a historical text. And oh my gosh, what a story it is. So Arthur, I'm gonna hand it over to you. The way we're going to do things is I'm going to start off with an initial question for Arthur, and then we'll have a reading. And I have to read my question, so I have to get rid of my spy getup, my spy glasses. I didn't get the cool ones that Midtown Scholar is giving out today. But as you heard from Alex, there's the button is right there for you to purchase this book, and here we go. So Arthur, how how did you come upon this incredible story? How did you find Noor Inayat Khan?
Well, from what you just said, Rafia, it sounded like you knew a little bit about Noor than I did when I first heard about her. Noor came into my life entirely accidentally around 2014. I was attempting to mind my own business when suddenly I got an email from friends who make documentaries. This was an alert to a new documentary they made called Enemy of the Reich. It was about to be on PBS in 3 weeks. I looked at the press release from my friends. It involved a young woman I never heard of, Noor Inayat Khan. Described her as a young Sufi woman. I was immediately intrigued because I know a lot about Sufism. Identified her further as the daughter of Hazrat Inayat Khan. That entirely woke me up. I knew a lot about Hazrat Inayat Khan's teachings. I knew that he was the first Sufi to come to the West. That was in 1910, and he stayed here till 1926, and he taught all that time. For Hazrat Inayat Khan's daughter to engage in espionage, possibly sabotage against the Germans, Paris, 1943, was the most improbable, fascinating, intriguing story that had come my way in a very, very long time. So that's how I learned about Noor. And also at that point, I was a professor of writing at a local university here in Baltimore. Before I even finished reading this notice from my friends, I organized a screening of the film. And that was before I saw the film itself. But while preparing for the screening, where we had a panel of people, Sufi scholar, a Holocaust scholar, a scholar of German history, I wanted to prepare. You have 3 people sitting in front of you, 300 people in the audience need to know where the discussion could possibly go and where you want to direct it. Course of all my preparation, I realized there was not a single good book about Noor. There was not a single good research about Noor. I wanted to be the one who would provide that. And I did.
Awesome. That's fantastic. That's incredible. So why don't we go ahead and have you read from the book itself? If possible, Arthur, just tilt the camera a little bit, tilted down so we can all see your face.
And so everybody knows from my end, I have a very bad sense of how I appear on screen. This is sort of like audiovisual 101. And I never liked that to begin with. Let's back up just a second. I said before that Noor was the daughter of Hazrat Inayat Khan, very famous, very influential Sufi teacher. This is Noor's father, Hazrat Inayat Khan.
Wow.
He was an Indian, spent 1910, 1926 in the West. This is, well, trying to get,
Aura.
This is Noor's mother, Aura Baker. She was born in America. She met Hazrat Inayat Khan around 1912 when he was teaching mysticism in New York City. And she fell instantly in love with him. About 5-6 months later, they eloped off to France. And this is Noor herself in her mid-20s. So quite a distinguished family.
You know, in the book, you talk about how she was always told that she descended from Tipu Sultan, you know, and that was part of her lineage. Like her father always said that's why she was descended from this king, and who beat the British. And it particularly struck me, you'll find this funny, because I grew up on Tipu Sultan Road. So it's always fascinating to see how that comes up in modern iterations. And at least for the South Asian, the listeners we have who are of South Asian descent, they're going to be very familiar with Tipu Sultan, and it's very fascinating that Hazrat Inayat Khan and then Noor traced their lineage to him. So yeah, I thought that was a very fascinating thing that you included in the book.
Yes. And he put up the longest, the most successful for a number of years, rebellion against these British who were taking over his country. And that's why, as you said, in later years, when Hazrat Inayat Khan would tell Noor about her heritage and about her legacy, he would tell her, he would tell the three other children in the Khan family, you are royalty. You hold up your head wherever you go. You can go into any court, a royal court in the world, and you are their equal, and indeed Noor was the equal wherever she went. So thanks for reminding me about that. Yeah, and embodied in this story and embodied in Noor's history is such a legacy of spirituality, of Indian history, of Indian royalty, of Indian determination to overthrow fetters and tyrants, whether it was back in India in the 16th, 17th century, or whether it was in Paris in 1943. You asked me to read something from the book. I'll be glad to. Okay, Noor and her family, 1921-22, settled opposite Paris, a tiny town called Suresnes. They lived in this house, which, as you can see, was as regal as Noor's family was. But June 1940, the Germans are invading France. Noor and her brother Valiant gather in what's called the, I have lots of photos, gather in what's called the Oriental Room, and they have a very serious discussion. Should they stay, even though the Germans are about to take over their country, or should somehow they leave? They decided to leave. Wyatt said, even though Noor was entranced and influenced by Gandhi, she was partial towards nonviolence. He asked her, you know, if a German came to the door and we had 20 Jews in the back, would we be an accomplice to their deaths if we give them to the Nazis? And of course, Noor agreed. But how would they then get from their house opposite Paris to the French coast? That's what I'm about to tell you. Noor's brother, Valiant, had an MG. If those of you out in the crowdcast land know anything about MGs, they're small British sports cars. When I read that Noor, her mother, her brother, her sister, got in Valiant's MG to go to the coast, that made no sense, because MGs traditionally have two seats. I did some research. For a few years, MGs also had jump seats. So Elia was driving, mother was in the front passenger seat, Noor and her sister Claire were in the jump seat. From the book now.
So they must be tiny to fit on that.
Extremely tiny, extremely cramped, and all of them literally are in the open air. An MG, I wrote, was a great car for a jolly picnic in the country, not for fleeing from the Nazis. An open-air sports car. MGs were made for rallies and for flirting with girls in Piccadilly or at Ascot. They weren't intended for joining a long line of refugees who were escaping to the coast while the Germans strafed them from the air. Soon after leaving Suresnes, the small town opposite Paris, Noor's brother turned the car onto roads filled with broken down cars and broken down people. And with infantrymen humiliated by their rout, and dead horses lying in ditches, and thousands of people on bicycles, weaving in and out of the rabble, and farm wagons piled high with tables and chairs and suitcases, and a grandmother being pushed in a wheelbarrow. There was a man carrying a cat, a woman carrying a bird in a cage, mothers pushing babies in prams, children carrying toys, dolls, blankies. Cars overheated or crept along. The flood of humanity was too dense for the autos to move any faster. and everywhere. Mattresses were lashed to the tops of Renaults, Citroëns, and Mercedes. On the top of one car, the body of a grandmother who had died en route was tied to a mattress because her son could not bear to leave her alongside the road. The MG maneuvered around large stones that had been thrown on the road, fruitless attempts to block German tanks. Germans and Messerschmitts circled above, unsure whether to strafe the refugees or let them collapse in exhaustion. Leaving the MG in Tours and with a friend, the Khans found seats on a train. The train, Noor wrote, was noisy and crowded, with frantic young mothers with tear-stained eyes carrying their sleeping youngsters. They knew not where they were heading, said Noor. They were just running toward freedom if freedom was to be found. For the little ones, Noor wrote, France should be saved from enemy hands at any price. I have wiped the eyes of some, given water to others. The distress of a human being is impressive, Noor included, but the distress of a whole nation, those whose hearts have not beaten and suffered with this cannot know what it means. Now, I am absolutely convinced that Noor in that jump seat for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours as her brother drove slowly and painfully off to the French coastline convinced her she had to return. I don't have any proof of that, but she had that type of a heart and that sense of duty that drove her towards helping people her entire life. And she could not have been deeply affected by that drive. So I am so pleased that the lion had an MG with a jump seat.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Arthur. You know what, something that you read in this piece, and even in my own reading of the book, you know, for instance, you mentioned the distress of a nation when you create this picture for us of the Inayat Khan children leaving Suren, you know, at this moment. But I was also thinking a little bit about how a heroine like Noor Inayat Khan, who is unexpected, who comes from a very cosmopolitan and syncretic background, is in some ways the perfect heroine for our time, and for those like in the United States, for instance, who are experiencing their own kind of distress over the events that have taken place in the past few weeks. So I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit about how this tale of heroism, female heroism, is different from the usual stories we hear of World War II heroines.
Sure, and thank you for raising that question, because Noor's relevance to today is extraordinary, and it's powerful, and it's unavoidable. And one of the qualities I adore about Noor, if I can use that word, is her determination. She never strayed from her duty. She never strayed from the rules of chivalry that her father laid down in 1926, just before he left Suren to return to India. And these were the code for the rest of her life. He said something like, consider duty as sacred as religion. Bear no malice against your worst enemy. Consider your responsibility sacred. Have regard for the feelings of every soul. And to me, of course, in this particular era, in this particular country, is his emphasis on truth. Truth, he said, is all the religion there is. Now, when Hazrat Inayat laid these down, these were not just for the male students in his order. These were for everybody. He was extraordinarily egalitarian. Right now, and I would not be surprised if somewhere in this country right now, people are marching and people are protesting because they do have regard for the feelings of every soul, because they do consider duty as sacred as religion, because they do care about truth. The Inayati order was very, very tolerant and welcoming and accepting of people from all faiths, of all genders. And yes, Noor was the daughter of the individual who created that order. She had a certain standing. But she used that standing. She used the knowledge that she gained from her father. She used the knowledge that she gained from studying all faiths to sustain her while she was working for that secret agency in Paris, the SOE, Special Operations Executive. She used that while she was in prison. First 2 months in a prison in Paris, then 10 months while she was chained and in solitary in prison in Germany, a city called Pforzheim. Never once did she stray from her sense of duty. Never once did she stray from these Sufi principles that had guided her. Never once did she let down her guard. Never once did she accept taunts, insults from anybody. This was a woman of inordinate integrity. And that was apparent when she was a child in Suren, when she took care of her siblings shortly after her father died because her mother was too distraught to help. That was apparent for the 6 years in the 1930s that she maintained her engagement with a fellow whom her mother and her uncle severely disapproved of. This was apparent when she went off to England, courtesy partly of her brother's MG, and it was apparent when she flew back to France in 1943. Duty, 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 and honor, honor, honor. And if I could read something again very shortly about honor, if I could find it in this mess. Okay. I will have to paraphrase because I don't know where that is. But here she is, France, 1943, Paris, 1943. There are tens and tens of thousands of Germans, Gestapo in that city. Noor's honor, and it was inbred in her, and it never died, and it is what led her through all of this. Noor's honor was devotion to God, devotion to service, devotion to others. The Gestapo's honor, and they did take an oath, but their honor was not to the state of Germany. Their honor sworn was to Adolf Hitler. Very different type of honor. Actually, we were talking a few minutes ago about how I learned about the story, how I learned about Noor.
Yeah.
And yeah, after I concluded there were no good books about Noor, I want to write one. One of the first things I did was to drive to upstate New York because there was a Sufi retreat center there in New Lebanon. I wanted to interview Noor's nephew, Pirzia. He also is a Sufi leader and very, very learned. About a week before I went there, I emailed him. I wanted to know if he had any idea of Sufi teachings, any teachings that may have sustained him for the 10 months in particular that Noor was in solitary and in chains in this prison in Pforzheim. He emailed me a verse from the Bhagavad Gita that he had heard helped Noor. And I wanted to see if I had a slightly different translation. So I reached over to my shelf, I pulled down my own copy of the Bhagavad Gita, and I flipped and flipped through this book until I did find that verse. And what I found rather peculiar was that I had not opened my Bhagavad Gita for a very long time, 25, 30 years. 25, 30 years ago, I had put brackets with pencil around one verse of the Gita. And it was the same one that Pirzia told me had possibly helped Noor. And it's about serving others. What else could have been appropriate for Noor? So I took my Gita up to New Lebanon with me. This is my personal Gita, everybody. And I thought I'll show it to Pirzia. I pulled it out of my backpack halfway through the interview, found the page, was about to hand it to him, when I noticed that I had not only put brackets around that verse, but I had also written in the margins, karma yoga, helping others, equals liberty. Then I handed it to Pirzia, and he almost shrugged and said, well, of course, because Noor's last word at Dachau, where she was killed, was liberty.
That's incredible. That's an incredible story. Wow. You know, one of my favorite, I mean, I have a lot of favorite episodes and stories from the book, but one of my favorite ones was how she was taught to code. So, you know, so she could like code and then transmit that back to London. And one of the things she had to go through was to go through this test where she had to code in front of, I think it was the person who ran the, what was this called? Strategic, what is strategic operation executive, the spy agent?
Special
operations executive. Yeah, sorry. It was also strategic, but no, the name was special. Yes. So anyway, I was just fascinated with that. The fact that they used code like that, and it was so integral ultimately to defeating the Germans. So one quick question that I had to ask before we open it to and get Alex to look at the questions the viewers have typed is, do you know code? Like, did you look through any of that, of how she actually transmitted these messages? And you know, is there any record of that, or no?
I did not make it up, Raf. Yes, there's a record. I have some of the actual messages that she sent.
That is,
yeah, wow. And just to back up a second, yeah. First, when Noor got to England, she had been trained by the Red Cross shortly before they left France. She wanted to help serve as a nurse. She worked as sort of an aide in a maternity ward for officers' wives. She didn't think she was contributing to the war effort that much, so she signed up for an auxiliary of the Royal Air Force. She learned code then, and she transmitted messages to pilots who were in training. Others along the way, though, learned about Noor's facility with other languages, learned that Noor had lived opposite France. She knew the layout, the geography of the city immensely well. She was recruited by the SOE, an organization that really nobody knew about during the war. So yes, Noor was trained as a radio operator when but first she just sent messages on a telegraph key, and it was very stable in an office. When she joined the SOE, though, she was trained to send messages on a tiny set for its time, had a receiver in it, had a transmitter, had earphones. We had these tiny phones. Could do anything with them. Noor had to lug around Paris this 30-pound suitcase
30,
crammed with
30 pounds.
wires,
Wow.
tube. Yes, I've seen these things. I've held these things, and yeah, there is evidence that Noor sent messages. There is these machines still do exist in various museums around the world, and frankly, I have learned code. It was difficult for me to learn, but I would often joke to friends when working on the book, it's easier for me to interpret all this mystical text because I'm reasonably well versed in it. But a military code, I know nothing about that.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So, it's 7:32. Alex, I didn't know if you want to jump in so that we can get some viewer questions. Once again, before we go on to that, you can buy the book by pressing the green button right under Arthur's face over there, and you can press on the question tab to ask a question, and we will try our best to get to it. And maybe in your question also say where you're from, because I think we've got people from all over the world. So it's just interesting to hear where you're listening to us from.
Thank you, Rafia. And yes, Arthur, just an incredible and fascinating story. So thank you for writing this book. To our audience members out there, yes, if you have a question, feel free to use the Ask a Question button. It's below the green button. Click that, submit your question. We've got a few rolling in right now, but submit it at any time, and I'll try to get to all the questions. But first off, I have a question for both of you. It's from Terry. We'll start with Arthur here, but they ask, please share a bit about your research process. How do you decide or discover what topics to write about? So Arthur, we'll start with you, then we'll go to Rafia.
Thank you. Excellent question, Terry. I appreciate that. First of all, when I begin a book, I have no idea what I'm about to do. I'm completely ignorant. As I said before, Noor came to me by accident. I know a little about Hazrat Inayat Khan, knew nothing about Noor, knew nothing about Sufi heroines, knew nothing about the stature of women in the Sufi movement. Of course, being a white Westerner, cannot avoid that. I had heard about how women are treated in Islam. What I wanted to do at the outset was to be with Noor physically wherever I could, to be with Noor spiritually, psychologically, aesthetically, wherever I could. And aesthetically is also a very good point, because I don't think we've mentioned that she was a tremendous poet, writer of children's short stories, musician, and a composer indeed of music. So she was multi-talented, which frankly I found daunting. I don't know people who have that much talent. One of my first ventures was to upstate New York, Pirzia. We had a very good discussion. I interviewed along the way many Sufis, many Sufi scholars, many Muslims and Muslim scholars. I interviewed many historians of the Second World War. I interviewed many people who knew these codes. I interviewed a German who was down near Washington on a visit. I interviewed two friends in England who had studied these codes. I went to Suren, where Noor's family had lived, 3 times, probably a total of 5 weeks. On one of those visits, I finally thought I should go across the river to Paris itself. On one of those trips across the river, I hired a woman who knew the city intimately. We trekked endlessly from one address to another to another. All of these were safe houses that Noor had used in June, July, August, September, early October 1943. Unfortunately, we could not go into any of them. People live there. They probably don't know the historic value of where they live, but I could stand outside, take notes, get a sense of these places. I went to Dachau when Noor was killed, spent 2 days there. And you cannot go to Dachau and not be moved. You cannot go to Dachau when you're doing a story about Noor and not be in tears. So geographically, I went to many places. I've recently begun to pack up all my Noor research. I'm not done. I have at this point 13 boxes of research about Noor. I have not yet packed up my 115 books. Someday I will, and I'm really sad to remove all this from where I live because it's become a part of me by now. One last thing, historians were extraordinarily gracious with their time. There were historians at University of North Carolina's Smith College, some in England, who spent a lot of time with me and also recommended obscure texts that I had never seen. Another fellow on obscure texts was David Harper, who was one of Noor's nephews. He was in southern Germany, right next to the town of Berchtesgaden, spent about 3.5 days at his house. He brought down from his attic roughly 6 boxes of material by Noor and about Noor. That's how I acquired her kindergarten report card. That's how I acquired essays that she wrote about all kinds of religions. That's how I acquired letters that she wrote to Azim, who was her fiance for 6 years during the war. One last thing about all that, and it's your turn, Opry, about research. One of the essays that I discovered by Noor, maybe 18 pages about world religions, she talks about shooting a pistol being the equivalent of meditating. And I did not understand what she was talking about until I finally realized she must have been writing this while she was being trained by the SOE. She never used a pistol before in her life. And it reminded me of a Zen book, Zen and the Art of the Tree, where that Zen monk said, if you are shooting a bow, you are the bow, you are the arrow, you are the target, and you are meditating. And also in that essay, Noor wrote about the real coming forth when the heart is broken. And World War II, I'm convinced, broke Noor's heart. And every day I pick up the New York Times that's delivered to me in the morning, and I see those headlines. My heart is broken too. We are confronting the real right now more than we have, at least in this country, in decades and decades and decades, and the heart is breaking.
Well, my answer to the question is I'm not quite the historian like Arthur. I don't have boxes. So I do have a lot of books. In fact, if you could look around me, I'm literally sitting in a room in a giant puddle of books because I'm working on my own book. And this has really been one of the most exciting things I've done in the past few months because all I do the rest of the time is read and write. I think for me, in this particular case, and and how it relates to my work is, of course, that I'm searching always to sort of, as a Muslim feminist author, my job inevitably involves an excavation. So excavating Muslim women from history who have been erased from a narrative. And then, the conclusion has been that there were no Muslim women in this narrative. They didn't exist. So, like most feminists, I see my task as writing those women back into that narrative. And so I was so, which is the reason why I was so excited by your book and by others. I recently reviewed Hussein Kiswan, I think Hussein's book, 21 Muslim Women, The History of Islam for the New York Times. And Noor Inayat Khan is one of them mentioned in that book as well. And I think that in that sense, I feel that the book is very much an invitation to Muslim women who are in particular who might read the book, others as well, but in particular to Muslim women, because it invites them to uncover this history and to show that their perspective and their strength and their resilience, which is so perfectly modeled by Noor, is present in narratives of World War II. It's present in narratives of, medieval Central Asia, medieval Europe, even. And to see themselves in that light and to consider all the other women that, who also are in boxes that are kept in attics or in archives, and to try to search through that. So I think you've done incredible work at showing how it's done, in terms of doing this archival work and this research and going there and walking the streets and looking at the houses. I truly, as an author, I truly have a lot of admiration for that, for your commitment to inhabiting those spaces and taking the time to inhabit them so that you can get as close as possible to Noor Inayat Khan. We can take another question, maybe?
Yeah. And I should note that that question was from Terry, who is a bookseller in Iowa. So far we have Iowa representing. This next question is from Corey, and they ask, curious to know if anyone from her family was interviewed for your research on the book.
Oh, indeed. Well, first of all, I mentioned Pirzia. I said earlier that I first interviewed him in New Lebanon, New York. Since then, he and his order have moved to Richmond, Virginia. So several interviews with Pirzia. Another member of the family is Mahmoud Khan. He lives in The Hague, but I interviewed him when he was in Suren, probably 6 hours of interviews. The fellow is 90 years old. He has more energy than any of us. I assure you, he's extraordinary. And he has a great memory. He recalls everything about Noor. He's probably the last person alive who knew Noor. He's very well versed in Sufism, in Hinduism, in Islam. We had wonderful discussions. I was at a great dinner at his house once in Suren. Another member of the family I interviewed was David Harper, who lives near Berchtesgaden, Germany. He does not know Noor. He's too young to have known her. But unfortunately, there aren't too many members of Noor's family left. Her 3 siblings died. Father died 1927. Her mother died 1947 or 48. I would have loved to have sat down with them, but I did not have that opportunity because I did not get that release about that film for PBS in time to interview those people.
Wow.
Okay, this next question is from Catherine, writing from Baltimore, Maryland. They ask, Arthur, I recall you once saying that you write to find truth at the tip of your pen. What truth did you find through writing this book that you'd want others to learn?
Okay, first of all, Catherine, I don't know your last name, but I suspect I know who you are. You're wrong. Apparently you were in one of my classes. I didn't say that. I should have flunked you, Catherine. I did not have that chance. I didn't say that I write to find truth at the tip of my pen. I said that Norman Mailer, God rest his very peculiar soul, Norman Mailer said he wrote to find truth at the tip of his pen. However, I think that was in one of the first nights in one of my classes, I gave a talk about why we write, and I quoted from several writers about why. Can't think of her name right now. Another writer said she also writes to find truth, and she also writes to sort out what's going on in her head. But in the end, I have realized that I too write to find the truth. I searched and I searched and I pounded the streets of Paris seeking Noor. I have gone through museums and archives and very, very dusty manuscripts trying to find truth, the truth of this woman. Yeah, certain myths have cropped up about her. I wanted to shed those truths. I wanted to shed those myths. I'd always embrace truth. I discard myths. But to take it to me, if I may, just a little bit personally, along the way, in my encounters with Noor, in my encounters with Hazrat Inayat's extraordinary teachings, in my encounters with this phenomenal woman who was steeped in Sufism, I could only encounter myself. I think in the end, a writer has to confront himself. He has to meet himself. And I learned many lessons from Noor. I learned lessons, of course, about truth. I learned lessons about kindness. I learned lessons about serving others. At one point while working on the book, somebody had done what I considered to be an infraction. I'd asked them to do something they didn't. It would have been good for them. They didn't take my advice. I was offended. And then I thought about this just a little bit. Who am I to tell this person what to do? Who am I to be so egomaniacal that if she doesn't listen to me, I'm offended and I'm not going to talk to her for 2 days? I apologized to her. Somebody else had done a favor for me. I always like it when people do favors for me. I thanked this individual profusely. She finally said, "Stop it, that's enough." And I thought, why am I being so thankful? And I learned I was thankful because Noor had taught me how to be thankful. So I'm indebted to Noor for this extraordinary lesson she has taken me. Catherine, give me a call someday. And retroactively, I may give you a different grade for that course.
This next question is from Tammy, and Tammy is from Mannheim, PA. I'm from Lancaster, so I know Mannheim very well. Tammy says, "Thank you for sharing her story through your book. I teach world history and love how her story touches on so many themes we emphasize in the course. As someone who knows her story intimately, what major aspects of her experience would you most want young people to take away?"
Thank you, Tammy. There are all these issues about chivalry and the code that Hazrat Inayat laid down. But to me, one of the most important lessons in his words is that the essence of spirituality and mysticism is readiness to serve the person next to us. The essence of spirituality is not to remove yourself from the world. The essence of spirituality is not to go to an endless meditation retreat, is not to hide out in a cave, is not to wear holy garb. The essence is readiness to serve the person next to us. If indeed you love others, if indeed you care about others, you serve them. Please ask your students to serve those next to them, in or out of your classroom.
So this next question is from Tammy as well. They ask, how well known is her story in other parts of the world, such as France or India? Arthur, if you want to answer this, but also Rafia, feel free to jump in on it as well.
Nominally, barely, marginally, sadly unknown. I mentioned that I had gone to Noor's town opposite Paris, Suresnes. I stopped by the tourist office on my first day, my first hour. I had no idea where I was. I picked up all kinds of brochures. I said, "Do you have anything here about Noor Inayat Khan? Or do you have anything about the home where the Khan family lived?" I showed you a photo of it. It's quite extraordinary. They had no idea what I was talking about. Noor is not known in her hometown, except for a school that is named after her. And I went there, I interviewed kids. That was a blast. I'll tell you about that in a moment. There's a short little street named after her. And those kids in that school know something about Noor. People who walk by that little street know nothing about Noor. Here in the United States, I assure you, Noor is not known. I cannot speak about India or Pakistan. I can say that when I first became aware of Noor and I brought that film to the university where I was teaching, I had an excellent student, Muslim from Pakistan. She had never heard of Noor before, but she was enthralled with the story, and she's back
That
home.
I was gonna say the same thing. Is that I never heard of her growing up, and I wonder why that is. And I also have a question for you. I'm gonna squeeze in. One is simply, I think, there's there's a tendency for cultures to elevate the history that fits a certain narrative. And as far as the history of the World War II and the 40s in the subcontinent is the history of partition and fighting the British. So to turn that on its head and to look at a woman who was fighting for the British, but against the horror of the Holocaust and the extermination of Jews, that points to a complicated history. And I believe in complicated history. So I think that, and which is why I think the book is important, is because it challenges this kind of very, binary expression of history. But I'm also hoping, and I was going to ask you if this book will be published in the subcontinent, because I really feel that there are a lot of readers who would be very interested in this story and in seeing how the daughter of Hazrat Inayat Khan, this very famous Sufi scholar, was part of something so, like I said, so unexpected, but also so brave and so committed to, like you said, duty and to doing the right thing in that moment. So yeah, are there any plans of international publication for the book, or?
Look, I have plans. Unfortunately, publishers in other countries don't have plans. I mean, as you know, for that to occur, publishers elsewhere have to buy the rights to it. That has not occurred yet. That may soon. I don't know. I would like nothing better than to have this book published in a multitude of languages in many, many countries on many, many continents. I can say, and I just learned this earlier today, there will be a major story, perhaps front page, about this book in a major newspaper, trying to be vague.
I know. I was like, you gotta tell us. You gotta tell us.
In a country not that we've all heard of, and this newspaper has a broad international reach. I'm hoping that will spur interest in bringing my book out in another country. I'm very troubled, frankly, that a publisher hasn't come forth in France, where Noor lived before the war, where Noor was during the war. I'm hoping that a German publisher comes forth. Nothing yet. But what you said before is absolutely correct. This is a complex story. There are multiple layers, and all of them all defy most of our expectations. How could this quiet, introspective, rather insulated young woman do what she did? And yeah, to me, it all comes back to duty and love and remembering, and all that's great, and not a shred along the way of cowardice or second thoughts that I'm aware of. And this is not what we, quote, expect of a woman. This is not what we expect of a Sufi woman. This is not what we expect of somebody who has lived their life as relatively sheltered as Noor did. And yet The war came, her heart was broken, and she came forth. And all the time that she was in Paris that summer and fall, not once did she disregard what she had learned from her father. Even to the extent when other members of the resistance was sure that somebody had betrayed her, she defended this fellow. She said over and over and over again, we cannot judge him. She had been taught not to judge others. It's mind-boggling and it's inspiring.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, we do have to wrap up, so I wanna close with, there's one comment here I'd just love to read, and then I'm gonna wrap up with one more question. Okay, so this comment is from bookstore friend Anakin. She writes, quote, "What a great account to add to the canon of resistance history, particularly the so long untold accounts of female contributions to the defeat of the occupiers. As someone who grew up with accounts of that occupation, my mother and grandparents lived through the occupation of Norway and told numerous stories of family members torn apart by divided loyalties. This book was fascinating. Thank you for shedding more light on this." So just I had to read that quote.
That's
Thank you.
And then
And
the
put
last,
put a question mark after that, so now we can say we had a final question from somebody.
yeah, right. So the last question is more of a fun one. It's for both Arthur and Rafia. What do you enjoy reading? Any upcoming books you are excited about? And this again is from Terry, who is the bookseller from Iowa.
I love every book about Iowa. I cannot put them down. Actually, the last time I was asked that was when I was giving a talk a few months ago, and I was still in the throes of minor research and wrapping up everything and the endnotes and RAFIA, you know how tedious that can be. And I said, I don't read anything serious in my few moments of downtime. I love P.G. Wodehouse, English humorist. I can read, and I have been reading volume after volume of English humor by P.G. Wodehouse. I have put up with being inspired by Noor, walking the streets of Paris with Noor, going to Dachau with Noor, and I want a breather. And I am happy that P.G. Wodehouse gives that to me.
Rafia?
Well, you know, I've been working on the book, so everything I'm reading tends to be focused for the book. But since you asked, I have two books that I would recommend. This book is Burn It Down, Feminist Manifestos for the Revolution, and it's from Verso, I believe, and it's really a fascinating book of how feminists have defined their agendas through history. And you know, I wish it was getting more publicity, but here, Burn It Down. You know, if you want a book that's very different from Arthur's book, it's not a narrative. And then another book is it's more of a book for historians. It's Durba Mitra's Indian Sex Life, and it's an interesting book because it looks at how British colonialists essentially used the idea of prostitution and controlling prostitution as the means to start making social legislation in India. And one of the interesting things about that is that at the time, obviously British society was conservative, so they actually classified almost everybody except upper class Hindu women as prostitutes. So Muslim women were prostitutes, lower caste Hindu women were prostitutes, Jain women were prostitutes. Everybody was a prostitute, which then gave them, you know, the power essentially to legislate what would happen to them. So it's a book that came out right before we all went into quarantine. I think there would have been more discussion around it. if obviously that had not happened. But yeah, those are two books that I thought that I think are interesting. But of course, today is Arthur's Day, and you know, that's the book that you need to buy. That's the button you need to be pressing. You know, booksellers and authors really need your support at this time. You know, we've all sort of been sentenced to our various studies and cannot interact, and we need all the help that we can get, and we need readers to engage with us. And especially with Arthur, who has really put such a tremendous amount of work. Congratulations to you, Arthur, on the publication of the book. I'm really honored that I got to be a part of this event and to talk about this book and to read this book, because it really is it really is a very fine contribution to feminist history and to Muslim feminist history, and it shows how very disparate strains come together in a very courageous individual. So, thank you.
And if I could interject one more thing, what you just said, RAFIA, is extraordinarily touching to me. Thank you for the plug you just gave my book. But beyond that, you know, you said it was now an honor to do this evening. That's how Noor affects people. This book is Noor's book. Yeah, my name is on the front cover. All goes well, I'll get some royalties. It's Noor's book. It was an honor to write this book. It was a privilege to write this book. It was exhausting and inspiring and exhilarating to write this book. I have set all ego aside. It's Noor's book. Setting all ego aside is what that verse from the Bhagavad Gita was about as well. Karma yoga equals liberty. Noor gave me liberty.
Thank you, RAFIA. Thank you, Arthur. It's been so amazing to have you here and to share Noor's story. Once again, the book is Codename Madeleine. Click the green button below if you'd like to purchase a copy. Congratulations, Arthur. Thank you again, RAFIA. Thank you to our viewers, to everyone out there who tuned in. Thank you so much. I will give just the last word to you, Arthur and RAFIA, if you want to wrap us up.
I'm good. I just I hope that, you know, this woman and her story and her history deserves to be kept alive. So I really hope that the listeners and readers who tuned in today can make that happen. You know, can keep her story and her act of tremendous courage alive by reading this book and by sharing her story in any way that they can.
And am I entitled to one last word as well? Thank
you, RAFIA,
of course. I want to refer to the beginning of chapter 10, where Noor talks about what she called the price in life. And we all pay a price in life. We don't all receive all the time. We give, we offer. And Noor, I wrote, said that the ultimate price, the greatest price, is to give of yourself. There is a joy, she said, in sacrifice. The people who are marching every day are sacrificing for a better future. Every time we see another individual, we can sacrifice, offer ourselves for them in some way. For me, this book is an offering to the world. To me, Noor was an offering to the world.
Thank you so much again, Arthur. Thank you, RAFIA. Everyone out there, stay safe. Have a good night. Thanks. Bye.